Hydraulic structures, such as the Moses Saunders Dam, located along the St. Lawrence River at Cornwall, Ontario and Messina, New York, control the outflow of water from Lake Ontario. But there exist a number of constraints that limit the ability to regulate outflows under extreme conditions. The amount of water entering Lake Ontario, including incoming water from Lake Erie, precipitation, and runoff from the surrounding land surface, cannot be controlled. Meanwhile, the structures and river channels downstream from Lake Ontario may have a limited ability to pass additional water downriver due to either physical limitations or operational constraints. The St. Lawrence River has only so much space and capacity to evacuate water out of Lake Ontario, which is much deeper and wider than the river. This limits the amount of water that can be passed downstream. Contributing to the flow of the lower St. Lawrence River, the Ottawa River drains into the system below the Moses Saunders Dam near Montreal, Quebec. Every spring, snowmelt and precipitation cause a large spike in its flows, which compounds the situation for those shoreline communities that have the entire Great Lakes drainage basin flowing past their properties. Essentially, we can characterize the St. Lawrence River as a tiny pipe with smaller pipes feeding into it while it attempts to drain a giant bathtub. Before the construction of the dam and seaway, the river naturally passed less water than it can now. Dredging required to reduce flood risk by the power authorities in the US and Canada made the river wider and deeper in some key areas, allowing more water to be passed. This kept Lake Ontario's levels lower in 2017 and 2019 than they otherwise would have been without the Seaway and Power project and regulation that was possible because of it. During springtime conditions, when snowmelt and additional precipitation are flowing through the system, the Lake Ontario outflows are regulated to balance high water levels upstream and downstream of the Moses Saunders Dam. This is accomplished through the Plan 2014 prescribed flows during normal conditions, but it can be slightly enhanced by board deviations from plan during extreme events, like those seen in 2017 and 2019. Due to this limited capacity to carry water downstream, the risk of worsening downstream flooding has potentially increased and needs to be carefully managed. All interested parties agreed to regulation of outflows in the St. Lawrence River as long as flooding wouldn't be worse in their downstream communities because of it. The plan allows water levels downstream to be maintained at higher levels, which can and do flood communities when Lake Ontario is also at high levels. These levels are based on studies of the flooding impacts that occur at certain thresholds. The plan also prescribes higher outflows during winter and other times when the downstream risks of flooding are lower. When Lake Ontario rises above the high water trigger levels specified in the IJC's directive, the board is directed to provide all possible relief to shoreline communities upstream and downstream of the dam. The board must then consider all aspects of the system, evaluate consequences of each option, and set Lake Ontario outflows based on best compromise within that situation. Throughout this balancing act, Mother Nature affects all the decisions. As quickly as rain can accumulate and increase water levels, it can also relatively quickly turn to drought conditions, with much lower than average water flowing into the drainage basin. The board works to find the most appropriate balance along the waterway to protect shoreline communities and all interests, including First Nations and tribal lands.